Hi there! This video will review robot design judging and rubrics and is only intended to cover information as it relates to the 2020-2021 Replay Challenge and is specifically for Illinois. This video is intended to provide somewhat helpful information for teams, coaches, and judges to use as they prepare for tournaments. Before we jump into reviewing the rubrics, there is sometimes some confusion regarding what the purpose of robot design judging is. Robot design judging is really about looking at how teams use what first is calling the engineering process, which is looking at how the team strategizes, designs, builds, programs, tests, and improves a robot that competes in the Robot Game Challenge for this season. As such, to score well in robot design judging, teams should strive to explain to judges how they approach the missions, robot design, building, and programming in a thoughtful way. How did they plan out the work they needed to do, and were their plans successful? If not, did they review their plans and change them? Teams need to convey this information to the judges and be able to explain to judges what they think was unique and useful about their robot's features and programming. While the concern in robot design judging is not on how the robot performs at the actual competition, judges do want to hear about how the team determined how successful their robot was through practices over the course of the season. How many points could the robot achieve in practice? How reliable was it in completing different missions in the time required? How did the team test their robot in programming? Did they make improvements or changes based on their testing? What did the team learn through this whole process? These are all examples of things that judges want to learn through the robot design judging. To build on this, here is a list giving a few examples of things that, while potentially interesting for judges to hear about, do not determine how a team will be scored in robot design judging by themselves. As we mentioned before, robot performance at the competition, the complexity or simplicity of the robot, whether or not sensors are used or how many are used, the number of missions the robot completes each time it launches, or the programming language used. So let's go through this list a bit. How the robot performs at the competition is already factored into the competition through the Robot Performance Award and already factors into determinations for advancement and Champions Awards. So it would be unfair to factor that into robot design as well. Plus, robot performance only shows how the robot performed at one particular point in time, and lots of variables may have factored into that. So that may not be indicative of the work the team spent leading up to that point in time. The other things listed on the slide are all examples of specific decisions a team made, and as such they only tell part of the story. There are many decisions a team makes while designing, building, or programming a robot, and it's the team's job in robot design judging to explain the decisions they made, along with the reasons they made those decisions and how those decisions contributed to the robot design as a whole. Hopefully that makes sense, but one more point to make. So, what this means is, yes, we said that robot design is not the same as robot performance, and so therefore, we're not wanting teams to spend their time during robot design judging showing the robot running missions. The judges can already watch robot performance videos if they think it would be helpful to understanding something about the robot and how it works, but the focus for the team should be talking about this engineering process that I just described, talking about the things they learned, about the testing, showing information related to that. So don't show the missions running, show information, show details that explain the whole engineering process as it relates to the robot design. Hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully it'll make even more sense as we go through the details of the rubrics. So moving on, the top section of the robot design rubric is called Identify, and focuses on the team's mission strategy and what the team members learned regarding building and coding. For the mission strategy, teams should be trying to explain how and why they chose the missions they are attempting during competition runs. A good mission strategy does not necessarily mean that the team has to be trying to complete every mission, and in fact, most teams will not be trying to complete anywhere close to every mission. But teams should be explaining why they chose the missions they chose, and their strategy should be explained within the context that this is a robot game competition where teams are trying to earn as many points as they can in 2.5 minutes. That said, though, a strategy for a team of students who are all new to FIRST and have never built or programmed robots before will likely be very different than a strategy from a team consisting of students who have participated in FIRST LEGO League Challenge for 4 or 5 years. But both strategies can score equally well in this section of the rubric as long as they are well explained to judges. Next, I want to remind everyone that when looking at the rubrics, many times you'll see multiple criteria listed in a section. For instance, the line here that looks to see how many team members learned building and coding skills. To score highly in this section, teams will need to convey information about both how many members of the team learned building skills and how many members of the team learned coding skills. If they only talk about one or the other, teams will most likely miss out on doing as well in this section of the rubrics. The other thing I want to talk about for this line, since it is new to the rubrics, is that it's really intended to emphasize that the purpose of participating in FIRST LEGO League Challenge is that team members should be involved in every area of FIRST. And they should be learning something in every section of FIRST. There are always opportunities for team members to learn new skills related to building and programming each season, and the team should convey that information to judges. Finally, before I move on, that having every team member participate and learn does not mean they all have to do so equally. It's each team member is different, and what they learn or how they learn and what they do will also be different, and we recognize that. It's important that every student is involved and learning, though. It just doesn't have to be to the same degree. Okay, now let's talk about the design section of the robot design rubric. This section is focusing on the innovative physical features and programming of the robot and also looks at the team's work plan. By now, hopefully, everyone is getting the sense that there's not one right answer for anything in FIRST LEGO League Challenge, and that applies to words like work plan and evidence as well. For our purposes, a work plan is just a plan in whatever form it takes that the team creates when setting goals for themselves, deciding how to achieve those goals. There's no formal structure that teams are expected to have. That can be whatever they come up with. And these plans could change over the course of the season, but obviously if they do, teams should talk about how and why they changed. Similarly, there are many different types of things that can be used as evidence. A team could have documents that they wrote and they want to show. They might have pictures showing them during the planning process. They might just talk or explain what they did, or they might have some other options as well. Any option for evidence can be perfectly valid. The one constraint, though, that we provide is that evidence must be shown or conveyed to judges during the question and answer period or during the robot design presentation. Teams cannot, for example, give judges a file or a link to look at outside of the presentation or the question and answer session. And if teams do provide that type of information, judges will not consider it when scoring the team. When describing the innovative features of a team's robot or programming, teams should always make sure to acknowledge if some or all of their features or programming came from sources outside the team, from books, websites, from other teams, even if it's from team members who used to be on the team but are no longer on the team. You should always give credit where credit is due. And there's nothing wrong with using that sort of information in FIRST LEGO League. But you need to, again, be upfront about it. Teams should also explain what they think makes their team's robot different or unique from ones they may have seen elsewhere or that they have built before. We understand that this may be a little harder for some teams this year. A lot of teams don't have as much contact with other teams. That's fine. Talk about what you think is unique in that case if you haven't seen anything. And obviously when you're talking about what you think is unique or special about your team's robot or programming, also talk about why that's helpful, why you think that unique feature helps your robot do something in some way or helps your robot complete a mission or be faster or whatever it does. Why is that unique feature useful? When trying to convey information about teams programming, it is not required that teams show the actual code, the written out code, but that it is often helpful to show examples of the written code when trying to talk to judges about it. It's typically just much easier for judges to understand code that is shown and explained. But at the same time, notice I just said two words. I said shown and explained. Showing raw code in and of itself is not all that helpful in judging either, because that is asking then the judges to be the ones that make sense of things. Judging is about the team explaining and making sense to the judges about what they did and their choices. So anytime a team shows some programming, they should also simultaneously be explaining that programming and that code to the judges. The create section of the rubric focuses on how the robot was built and programmed to achieve the missions or strategies selected by the team. So a couple of things. Remember what we mentioned earlier, sensors are not required, but if a team uses them, they should be explained to the judges, and they should be explaining to the judges how the sensors help them complete missions that might otherwise be harder for them to have done. Also, the word attachment, as used in this section, just means physical feature of the robot. So, for example, a team that had no sensors and did not add or remove any parts from their robot during the course of completing missions would still be able to be scored in this section by looking to see how useful or functional the different features of the robot are. To repeat something mentioned earlier, a more complex robot is not going to necessarily be better than a simpler one. However, what we often see is a team that builds a more complex robot often spends more time talking about the physical features of their robot and how those features help them complete missions, while a team with a simpler robot often doesn't really talk a whole lot about the physical features of their robot and how their robot's physical design helps them complete missions or score points. Teams that want to score well in this section of the rubric have to make sure that they are explaining to the judges about the physical features of their robot. Whether they are complex or simple, it doesn't matter. Those are all different choices. And as we are reminding everyone, the choice in itself is one thing. It's explaining the choices is what robot design is really about. Okay, moving on to programming again. Again, we already said that when talking about programming, you don't have to show programming to the judges, but it is easier if they can see it. We also know that typically a lot of teams are used to printing out all of their code and bringing it to the judging session. And obviously that's not really going to work this year because you're not probably going to be able to easily flip through and show all of that. So you'll want to think about how to have your program accessible, how to have maybe some screenshots of interesting parts or unique features or parts that get used a lot or that your team really liked and can explain and show to the judges easily, and how they can have other bits of programming available if the judges ask, or if they can't easily show that in the remote format, be prepared to be able to explain that as thoroughly and as clearly as they can to the judges. Okay, the iterate section is asking for evidence about both how the robot and programming were tested and improved. Again, it's okay if the only evidence provided by the team is just examples of what that the team talks about, but being able to show documentation, whether it's written documents or images, relating to how the team tested their robot programming, or being able to show examples of early designs or early programming and contrasting with later versions, that can all make it much, much easier for teams to explain and show and for judges to understand what the team is talking about. So think about how you can show the judges that progression or those changes over time. And again, remember that judges will not be accepting documents to review outside of the presentation or question and answer period, so you need to be able to convey this information during the presentation or question and answer period itself. And again, just remember, this section was talking about improvements to the robot and the code, so you need to be able to show both of those to do well in this section. Okay, as with all sections of the rubric, the communicate section does not focus only on the robot design presentation, but will also be supplemented by information given by the team during the question and answer session. It's really looking at the big picture of the team's robot design and how successfully the team conveyed that information to the judges. It's also looking to make sure that all team members are involved. And when we're looking at, for involvement, we're looking at that all team members were involved in robot design over the course of the season, and that all the team members were involved in the presentation and question and answer session. And again, involvement does not mean equal involvement. It's okay if some members had a smaller role than others, but we do want to see that every member is able to make a meaningful contribution in some way or other. So now that we've looked at the entire robot design rubric, I want to give a few more general reminders. This year, core values will be judged based on how the team used core values in robot design and in innovation project. So there is no core values presentation. Judges will be expecting to hear teams talk about things related to core values in the robot design and innovation project presentations. We'll talk about this more in a core values presentation, but just keep that in mind and be prepared and be ready and learn to talk about those things in this presentation. If you haven't done so, look at that core values rubric and think about that and look for that presentation that we are putting out. Also, as we've already said, judges will only be scoring teams based on information provided at the tournament. And by at the tournament, we're meaning that teams include in those videos that they provide or during the question and answer period. Judges will not consider information that they may already know about a team from outside the tournament and will not accept it or factor in information they may be given, such as files or links that the teams may give them during the presentation or question and answer period. I did say before, judges may look at their oral performance runs if they would think it would be helpful to understand it, because that is something the team has submitted and it's part of the tournament. But in most cases, that will not be necessary as for judges to do as part of the robot design process. Finally, remember that the rubrics are not scored on a curve. Each team is scored individually based on the information that judges learned from them and how the judges think they did in comparison to the information on the rubrics and what the rubrics are asking for. What this also means is that a team could score very well on the rubrics, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily the top team in that area. A lot of times at many of our tournaments, we have many teams that do very, very well on the rubrics because you all have this information, you're all able to prepare and be prepared to provide the information necessary to score very well. So, this is the rubrics get given back to you to help you see what judges thought, but the rubrics are not, again, saying that you scored high, so therefore you did better than other teams. Each team's score is individual to them, not in comparison at all. I hope this information has been helpful. If you have any questions, please contact me. My email's on the screen, fll-judgeadvisor@firstillinoisrobotics.org. Thank you for listening. I hope you all have a great season. Goodbye.